Okay.
Okay. So hello, Yambe. We're delighted that you're here to tell us a little bit about your experience on the Chrysalis Arts Residency. So I wondered if you could start by telling us a little bit about your practice and then maybe how this residency supported that.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me for this interview as well. I think it'll be nice to talk through my experience on the residency. My practice, I would say I basically create contemplative experiences through different media, which are typically sculptural or digitally based. And these often look at different layers or different parts of reality. So they're oftentimes very interconnected with mathematical or scientific areas of research. For the residency, I drew upon my experience and time spent in Zen Buddhist monasteries, which is a core influence in my practice. And I used the residency as an opportunity to develop further these types of meditation-based works that I sort of had started to do in previous exhibition or residency opportunities I had. So previously I had written and performed, I suppose, meditations for audiences as part of a solo show with Attenborough Arts Centre in Leicester, for example. And then I recorded a sound meditation based on a VR piece that I did for Fact Liverpool, which you can still listen to on Spotify. But I thought that this would be a good opportunity to explore this medium further and really focus on it as the core work rather than like a sort of supplementary work around like, a digital piece or something like that. So as I mentioned, Zen Buddhism is a huge influence on my practice, and part of the practice involves seated or walking meditation, both typically done in silence. And the walking meditation, it can be done outdoors through the landscape. And I think this relationship between the individual and the environment is a really core connection in that practice. And so being able to work in the natural environment and directly connect with it and base my research sort of on daily and lived observations, that was a really core part of the work.
Yeah, so because we wanted to ask you specifically about, or particularly around the experience of doing the residency, what do you feel is the most significant part of working in that sort of format rather than your day-to-day practice? So, I mean, we're thinking about, coming up to Chrysalis and spending some time in that environment.
Yeah. I think this residency and the format of doing residencies overall is a really key part, at least for my artistic practice, because typically I work in isolation, like in my studio, which can be quite like disconnecting. And so residencies I see as an opportunity to engage more directly with the outside world and with new audiences and new people I wouldn't normally have contact with. And I think since, my process is typically research-based, I get my ideas from doing research. And so I think exposure to new ideas, new ways of thinking, new places is really key for that.
And that leads me really nicely on to how important in this residency was the location of the residency. And I guess, did you research into that at all, or was that sort of subsidiary?
Yeah, I had some time to research into it before I went up to the Art Depot. And I think what really, I mean, there are so many different points of interest, I think, in that landscape. I think what initially interested me was the geological history, the ecological links, like the unique sort of biodiversity, as well as the monastic and anthropological history. I think once I got up there, it's a really interesting landscape, because I think it's like quite a difficult one to build around or to travel in, because it's almost like a demanding landscape, because it's so varied and mountainous. I don't want to say it's hostile, but it's I mean, compared to like city life, where you can just have a very nicely leveled plot of land which you can build anything on. I remember walking and driving through, the dales. You really have to go around the landscape, which takes more time and effort, but it's rewarding in its own way, because you get to experience, the wilderness and these amazing views, and just, be embedded more in nature. So I think once I got up there, I wanted to focus on the geological history, because I think because it's such a difficult landscape, like a lot of the history is just still out there. Like in the city, for example, you would just build on top of old settlements. They just disappear or are destroyed completely. But it seems like around the Dales, you have to work with what you can manage to build already. So things like these old, stone barns, or like the stone walls. I think I remember even coming across old farming equipment from like the 1930s, just laying out in the open, and had become this sort of steel sculpture like object. But it seems like there's limitations. People end up having to work with them, and it almost creates this more balanced relationship between humans and the natural world, which I find really interesting.
My next question was, there is one about sort of actually the particular experience of working with Chrysalis, but I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying there as well about, has this changed? Has that period of working with that, like you say, quite a difficult landscape sometimes, is that having impacts on your practice now, a little bit of time after you completed the residency? Is it still filtering through?
I think so. I mean, definitely on a personal level. Well, I think I've always craved like a closer connection to nature, just in my day-to-day life. I mean, now I'm doing this residency up in Edinburgh, which I had never been to before. And I think anyone who's been up there, like, it's quite an interesting city, because you have Arthur's Seat like in the middle of the city, and the sea is right there. And I just like contrast places like that, and then Yorkshire to, where I'm based now in London, where I just have the built environment and maybe some pockets of green, the parks and everything. But yeah, I think actually, I had Chrysalis, like the residency was also really key for me in sort of thinking like how I want to live and work in the future. I think that space, the Art Depot particularly, it's such a really nice live work space, which is like the dream, I think, for any artist, or at least for me, to have like a nice space like that is both suitable for living and for creative working, and then just going out and being able to walk, in nature and think about things, and then return and just experience like a slower way of life, and probably a slower way of working as well. So yeah, I think it's definitely like a long-term goal for me to achieve something similar to that. So it certainly, I think, shaped my creative ambitions in that way too.
That's really interesting, and great to hear as well that it's continuing to have that impact. And then, was there anything else about the specific experience with Chrysalis? So the conversations that you had with our colleagues, and your response to the space as well. Were there other things that you got out of the residency, or that you learned about yourself or your practice that that you think were particularly important to you?
Yeah, I think so. During the residency, I went on this walk with a psychologist named Mark. I can't remember his last name right now, but I think he works with Chrysalis quite often. But yeah, just walking with him we went through Molim, and he was just pointing out like basically how to read the landscape from his point of view, which if I had just been visiting on my own and walking around, I wouldn't have noticed these things or been able to read meaning into the vegetation, or like there was like this sort of circle of rocks and like soil pushed up against the side, and to me, I wouldn't have known what that indicated, but it was stones and things that had been moved by the glaciers during the formation of that terrain. Yeah, I think just learning to read more deeply into nature and to slow down one's perception and look more deeply, that's something that I've carried away from that as well. I mean, it takes a lot of expertise and time, of course, to learn how to do that and what to look for and what that all means. I think that is really fed into just a desire for deeper research on my end.
Thanks. That's really, I think that's really fascinating and quite key in terms of how this residency might have been set up a little bit differently. What advice would you give to other artists about getting the most out of residency opportunities? And I appreciate this isn't your only one, but maybe specifically this one, what would you say is the key thing to go in with?
Yeah, I think it sort of goes back to how I see residencies playing into my creative practice as, a way to expose myself to new ideas, new places, and new people. I think it's really key to go in with an open mind and to have that sort of flexibility around how ideas might change. And also to just engage as much as possible with that new environment, whether it's talking to different people or taking long walks and just exploring, as opposed to like, public transport or like more fast ways of traveling. I think walking is really key to just being able to explore and process things at a slower pace. Yeah, I think for the site at Gargrave and the Craven district, like as I mentioned, it's such a rich landscape. There were so many different sort of points of entry into how I might have approached the residency. So I think it is good to have a plan and be open to how that plan might change. And I think it's also good to sort of research beforehand, just like practical considerations, because up there, it's very different to like city life where you can get around sort of on a whim, just take, a bus or a train if you want to go somewhere. But I think there is like one or two shuttles a day in Gargrave. So I only did that once. The first time I went up there, I rented a car, so I had more flexibility. but yeah, just if it's something I think, you know, you're not used to, then definitely it's beneficial to plan ahead.
Yeah, definitely. It's not always easy, and it's such a big area as well. North Yorkshire, particularly, to get from one side to the other is pretty significant. Is there anything else you want to ask Helen or add?
I was just wondering, do you feel like you definitely needed transport there, or were there enough places of interest walkable from the depot?
I think for what I wanted to see, I definitely needed transport. I think one of the other ways I could have approached it was to focus more tightly around Gargrave, which is definitely possible. I mean, there are walks around there, or I think there's plenty of material for creative inspiration. I think because I wanted to focus on this sort of geological history, it was key to explore more widely. I didn't get to go to all the places I wanted to, also because sometimes the weather just wasn't permitting. So yeah, it's also good to have backup plans as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
Very much. That was really, really insightful, to, you know, into how that experience has been for you.